Brothers in the back. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulihil kareem wa man istanna bi sunnatihi ila yawmiddin. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Allahumma thabbitna inda al-mawti bi la ilaha illallah. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let's try that one more time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. MashaAllah. You are awake. Alhamdulillah. Welcome back, everyone. Friday night halaqah. Tonight we are looking at the topic of evolution of Islamic law. And this is a series where we are trying to establish what is known as the madhab phenomenon or the schools of Islamic law. And there are different stages of development that we are looking at, right? So we start in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In the Prophet's time, the sources of Islamic law are limited. It is Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whenever you have a fiqh question, you just go to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he answers it. After he passes away, the second stage is the stage of the Khulafa Rashidun, okay, which is about 30 years after the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in this stage, another source of Islamic law is added, and that is ijma, or consensus of the Sahaba. So whenever a new issue comes up which was not there in the Prophet's time, the Khalifa, the Caliph, would consult the Sahaba, the major Sahaba, people of knowledge, and then they would try to reach a consensus, and then they would go in that direction, right? But the final decision would still rest with the Khalifa, right? Because it was a matter of opinion. It's not like something there in the Quran and the Sunnah. If something there in the Quran and the Sunnah directly mentioned, then there is no opinion then. You cannot overrule it, right? That's from Allah. We're talking about fiqh matters where new issues come up which are not directly mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah, and how do scholars resolve that. So the second stage was the stage of the Khulafa Rashidun. The third stage was the Banu Abbas, Banu Umayyah, the Umayyad dynasty which started after the Khulafa Rashidun for about 100 years. Okay, about 100 years they ruled. In their time, a fourth source of Islamic law was added, and that was Qiyas. Qiyas, or Ijtihad also it was known. And this was where an individual scholar would reach some kind of an opinion. Consensus is not there because in their time the internet wasn't there. In their time telephones weren't there, right? So the Muslim Ummah had spread to a very large area, and scholar in the east might not have any communication with the scholars of the western part of the Muslim empire. So they were limited to their areas, geographical areas. And we said that around this time, two major schools of thought started developing in the Muslim world. One was in the Hijaz area. This was led by Imam Malik. Imam Malik was the one who was behind the Hijazi school of thought, or the Maliki school of thought. And this school of thought was based on a pretty much literal interpretation of the text. Why? Because Islam had remained pure for most part in Hijaz area. It was not complicated like it was in Iraq, because the philosophies of other cultures, other religions had impacted those people. Whereas Hijaz area was pretty pure, remained pretty pure. So there was no more reliance on, there was no need to rely on opinion that much. So this was known as school of the Hijaz, or the Hijazi school, which was based on Hadith. They were called Ahlul Hadith. This school was called Ahlul Hadith school because they literally just stuck to the Hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The second major school of thought was developed in Iraq area, and this was led by Imam Abu Hanifa. Okay? And this became known as Ahlul Ra'i, the school of opinion. Okay? which is not to say that they did not use hadith. Of course, Imam Abu Hanifa and his school used hadith. But in his area, the authenticity of hadith was doubtful. This is before the time of Imam al-Bukhari and Imam Muslim. The compendiums of hadith, the authentication process of hadith had not yet been fully developed. So these scholars relied on opinion or ijtihad more than they relied on the hadiths that were floating around in the area, because many of these ahadith were fabricated, were lies. And so there was no process at this time, definite process. Of course, there was some process, but no definite process to go through the hadith and say it's authentic, this is not authentic, and so on. So because of their reliance on opinion, this school became known as Ahlul Ra'i, or the school of opinion. And that is why these schools, they developed different methodologies over time, which then later on translated into the madhabs. So the Hanafee madhab, the Maliki madhab, because of the way these schools were developing, the geographical areas they were coming from, the kinds of needs and demands of their area which were different to other areas where other schools were developing as well. Another thing we said was that even though the famous schools of thought now in our time, we know of four famous schools of thought, which are the Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali, right? These are the four schools which are famous now. But in the early centuries, there were hundreds of schools led by hundreds of ulama in all over the Muslim empire. Many of those schools disappeared due to political reasons. Many of those scholars did not have brilliant students who could take their work forward. Many of their works were lost over time. Okay? So there were many factors which led to the emergence of these four schools and the disappearance of those other hundreds of other scholars and their works and the schools. Not that we don't have anything from them. We have some work still from them. But these schools never developed or flourished like these four flourished. So now we have reached a point where we are going to look at each of these four schools in a little more in-depth way. Anyone has any questions before we begin? We're going to start with the first. We're going according to the date. Out of the four scholars that we just mentioned, who is the one, the earliest? Imam Abu Hanifa. So we're going to look at his madhab, his methodology, and so on. Imam Abu Hanifa, this is his lifetime, 702 approximately, 767. When did the Prophet ﷺ pass away? Huh? 6 what? 646. No. He was born in which year, according to our calendar today? 570. Around 570. And he lived for 63 years approximately. So which year would that have been? 632, 633, right? Somewhere around that region. So Imam Abu Hanifa is what? Not that far from his time, right? If you look at historical, the gaps, it's not a very big gap. 632, the Prophet passes away. 702, Imam Abu Hanifa is born. So it's a 70-year gap, okay, which means there is one or possibly two generations between the Prophet ﷺ and Imam Abu Hanifa. That is why he is known as the people of the minor tabi'een. Imam Abu Hanifa is one of the minor tabi'een. Who are the tabi'un? So we have the Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, who met the Prophet ﷺ while they believed in him. And then the next generation are called the tabi'un, the followers, okay, of the Sahaba. What is the definition of tabi'i? The one who met a Sahabi. Just like a Sahabi is the one who met the Prophet ﷺ. A tabi'i is the one who met the Sahaba. So Imam Abu Hanifa actually met. He's considered to be a minor tabi'i because he met some of the youngest Sahaba who by his time are very old. Right? So they are not major Sahaba that he met, but he met some of the minor Sahaba who were very, very old by his time. But most of his knowledge comes from the tabi'in, the senior tabi'in. He is from the later tabi'in. From the senior tabi'in, he gets a lot of his knowledge from them. This madhab is named after its founding scholar, Imam Abu Hanifa. whose actual name was Nu'man ibn Thabit. So it's not his real name. Abu Hanifa is a title, right? Like a kunya. But his real name is what? Nu'man ibn Thabit. Yes. The father of Hanifa. So these were titles that were given to, even from a very young age, the Arabs would give you, you're a baby and you're called the father of someone or the mother of someone. I remember when I first came to the US, I was 17, only 17, and the brothers I met at the masjid, they used to call me Abu Tayyib. That they gave me a kunya because they were in the habit of everyone has to have a title. Whether you're married, you're not married, you're young, you're old. So this was a tradition from the Arab, which continued. So that was his title. He was born in the year 702 Common Era in Kufa, Iraq. So I want you to understand where he is. His geographical location is very important. He is in Kufa, which by this time was a center of political activity. There had been a lot of politics in the Kufa area. Remember, this is after the time of Ali radiallahu anhu moved the capital from Medina to Iraq. And then all the wars that happened, the civil war that happened between Muawiyah and Ali radiallahu anhu, and the schisms which started, the political factions, the Khawarij have already done their damage by this time. And this is also the time when the Muslims were highly influenced by Greek and Roman philosophy. So this is a time when Muslims are translating Greek works into Arabic, okay, which a lot of them were very useful because they were mathematics and chemistry and sciences, but then some of them were also about Greek mythology and Greek religion and Greek philosophers, own understanding about God and universe and all of that stuff. So the Muslim scholars by this time are also dealing with this influence of Greek philosophy. So he is born in a very difficult area, as opposed to Imam Malik. We'll talk about Imam Malik. He's in Medina. Things are much more easy over there and pure over there. So Imam Abu Hanifa is not an easy thing for him. His father was a silk merchant of Persian origin. So Imam Abu Hanifa is not an Arab. Okay, he was from Persian origin. Remember, the Persian Empire had become part of the Muslim, and so a lot of people had come to Islam from the Persian Empire. So his father was from the Persian side and origin, and he was a silk merchant. So he's from a business family. Imam Abu Hanifa is raised in a business family who accepted Islam during the reign of the Khulafa Rashidun. So his father had accepted Islam in the time of the 4 caliphs. So that was not like very long time ago, a few decades before that. So this is basically a new Muslim family. You can consider them to be a new Muslim. This is a second generation, right? Imam Abu Hanifa is the second generation Muslim in his family. His grandfather was not a Muslim. His father accepted Islam, and this is a second generation family. This is the beauty of Islam. How from the depth of darkness and shirk and kufr, light comes to an area. Islam comes, and look at, just in the second generation, it produces a person like Imam Abu Hanifa, from Persian origin, who has nothing to do with Islam in his family. Imam Abu Hanifa began his earliest studies in the field of philosophy and dialectics, known as Ilmul Kalam, but after mastering its various disciplines, he left it and went into an in-depth study of fiqh and hadith. Ilmul Kalam is a branch of philosophy. We have philosophy. You go to college, they give you philosophy 101. Okay? I don't know how many of you have ever taken a philosophy course in college. Philosophy. Very few. No, I took a philosophy course, and by the end of the course, I did not know anything about philosophy. It was like going over my head. It was so complicated, the philosophy course that I went through. But what happened is, because this area, as I said, was influenced by Greek philosophy, so a lot of the young kids in school, they started learning philosophy. And as youngsters, when they would go for higher studies, they would kind of master in philosophy. And the philosophers, the ones who did not reach the highest levels of the field, they pretty much, many of them were leaving Islam. That's what philosophy can do to your head. It can mess you up so bad that you start doubting Allah, you start doubting, the truth of the Quran and the Sunnah and all that stuff. So many of these people were kind of like, Muslim by name only. In their heads, they had this new religion, new understanding about things which contrary to the Quran and the Sunnah. Some of them even left Islam. But those people like Imam Abu Hanifa who mastered philosophy, they came back to the Quran and Sunnah. And you'll find this example in many other scholars who went to the highest, like a PhD level of philosophy. When you get there, you realize how true Quran and Sunnah really is. Okay? So you have to go through a process where you will doubt and doubt and doubt. You'll become a skeptic, and then you reach that very high level of knowledge in philosophy, and then you figure out this is no good. Because what it does is, philosophy, it asks questions, it doesn't give you the answer. It creates a lot of doubt in your head, but it never resolves the problem. And by the way, this is the basis of religious studies in Western universities. If you're becoming an Islamic scholar in the Western university, what's the difference between Western universities and Islamic universities in Medina, in Cairo, in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in Pakistan? What's the difference? You become an alim over there, you become an alim over here too, right? Scholar, PhD. Both are doing PhD, but their worldview is so different to each other. Because the Western, religion, and that's why a lot of the religious studies department come under the Department of Philosophy. Because it is a philosophical school of thought from which you study religion. So you learn to doubt everything. You cannot trust anybody. That's what they teach you. Don't trust any source. Don't trust any evidence. So you learn skepticism when you are, getting your degree in the Western, which is an excellent thing to do when it comes to sciences. It's excellent because that's what you need. You need to keep researching, proving, this is wrong, I need a better. But when you do that with the Quran and the Sunnah, you say, I'm not going to trust the Quran and the Sunnah, so you're starting from a position of atheism, basically. Or you're starting from a position of skepticism towards Quran and Sunnah. Anyway, that's a different topic, but I thought I'll mention it because Ilmul Kalam came here. And Imam Abu Hanifa, after studying it in depth, he left it. And he came back to the Quran and Sunnah and the studies of Hadith. What happened regarding his turnaround? I told you the story. Who remembers? Who's the one who played like an epic role in Imam Abu Hanifa becoming an alim? The one individual and one incident which turns his life around. You remember what was and what the incident was? Huh? It before. This time in Iraq, in the area he is in, Kufa, Baghdad, all these areas, there was a leading scholar of his time. His name is Imam Ash-Sha'bi. Imam Ash-Sha'bi. He was a very well-known scholar at the time. Okay. One day, Imam Abu Hanifa was passing by Imam Ash-Sha'bi's halaqah. Imam Ash-Sha'bi is giving this talk, and Imam Abu Hanifa passes by, and Imam Ash-Sha'bi, he notices him and says, come here, young man, come here. Imam Abu Hanifa is a young man at the time. And he says to him, oh young man, I see signs of intelligence in you. Why don't you study the religion? Meaning, why don't you invest your intelligence in becoming a scholar of Islam? I see signs of intelligence in you. Now, we don't know what he saw in him. Was it that he had interactions with him in the past, and maybe through those interactions, he saw some intelligence in Imam Abu Hanifa and he wants to push him in this direction? Or he just saw him and noticed something different about him. Sometimes it happens. You see a person say, this guy's face, he looks sharp. He looks intelligent. He looks, this or that, right? We get these ideas by looking at a person. Not always are we right, by the way. A lot of times we're wrong about our assumptions about people. But anyway, he says to him, why don't you do this? Imam Abu Hanifa, he said, I did not expect that coming from the great scholar of Iraq. That he, out of all the people, he picks me and he says, I see you're an intelligent person, go and study Islam. He said, I left everything, philosophy he had already given up by this time, and I started studying Islam. But he did not become a student of Imam Ash-Sha'bi. He became a student of, scholar named Hammad. Hammad was his main teacher. Okay, Hammad ibn Zayd was the name of this, who was amongst the greatest scholars of Hadith of his time in Iraq. And who is the teacher of Hammad? Do you guys know? So Hammad is the teacher of Imam Abu Hanifa. Who is the teacher of Hamad? Where did Hamad ibn Zayd learn his knowledge? Very good. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anh. Remember, after the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sahaba, they went into different areas and settled down in other places in order to teach Islam. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, the very prominent Sahabi, he went where? To the Iraq area. And he settled there and he started his school of thought and teaching over there. One of his students is who? Hamad ibn Zayd. Zayd's main student is who? Imam Abu Hanifa. So most of the knowledge that we get from Imam Abu Hanifa is channeled from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. His main source of information is Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. Okay, so that is a significant thing because he's one of the main Sahaba. His knowledge is coming from a very, very authentic source. Imam Abu Hanifa studied under him for 18 years. So he was the student of Hamad ibn Zayd for 18 years. And he loved his teacher so much that he named his son Hamad. Okay? How many of us love our teachers this much that we will name our child after our teacher because we love the teacher so much? That's the love of Imam Abu Hanifa and his respect for his teacher. And in one narration, Imam Abu Hanifa, he said, it has never happened that I made dua to Allah and I forgot my teacher. Every time he raises his hand, makes dua, part of his dua is for his teacher. So remember, this is the adab of learning. Don't forget your teacher. Make dua for your teacher. Somebody taught you something, that is knowledge, that is precious that you got from that person. Somebody taught you a manner, an adab. Somebody inspired you when you were younger. When you are old, always remember your mentors, always remember your teachers in your dua. Okay? Dedicate part of your dua towards your teachers. This is how the true students are, the good students are. So for 18 years he studied under him. During this time he became qualified to teach, but instead remained Hamad's student until the latter died in the year 742 Common Era. So in that time, if you're a student and your teacher is living, you don't teach. No matter how qualified you become, if your teacher is alive, he takes the session. You are there as an assistant, right? In our times, what happens quickly, we, like teacher he did masters, but I am a PhD, right? I'm better than him. I'm more qualified than him. So I'm going to now take over his session. But no, in that time, the respect for the teacher was as long as the teacher is living, he's going to be the teacher and the students are going to, observe him and help him and be in the assistant position. After Hamad's death, Imam Abu Hanifa took up the position of teacher at the age of 40 and became the most outstanding scholar in Kufa. There is something about this age 40 which is amazing, right? If you look at many of the prophets, they became prophets at the age of 40. Even in the Quran, Allah mentioned this age. 40 is a specific age Allah mentioned in the Quran. There's something special about this age. Also, the original Arabs, the classical Arabs, they considered you to be a young person until 40. And from 40 to 60, they considered you to be an adult. So, for the Arabs, that's why they had different words for. They had, tifl, they had walad, all the different words. They had shab. Shabun would be the young man below 40. So you're 39 years old, but you're still a youth, right, according to the Arab. And then when you hit 40 and up until 60, that's your adult age where, you're at the peak of your mind. You're at the peak of your abilities. You're sharp, your memory, your understanding of things, your maturity level. So Imam Abu Hanifa also became the teacher or main scholar of the area in Kufa at the age of 40. Any questions so far? I don't want you to miss any questions about any areas that we discussed. Are we good so far? You understand? Okay. I might quiz you at the end. So you better pay attention. All right. As such, he appeared to be a valuable prize to the Umayyad caliphs of that time. They offered him the position of Qadi or judge of Kufa, but he refused the post in spite of being physically beaten for his refusal by the Amir of Kufa, Yazid ibn Umar. So Imam Abu Hanifa was of the opinion, as we have discussed in the past, that scholars should be independent of government. That's why he never in his life accepted a government position. His understanding was, if you are on the payroll of the government, you cannot give independent opinions. You see, we call this freedom of speech. We also call it conflict of interest. Right? So these are Islamic values from the very early centuries that Muslims observed. He said, no, the scholars should not be on the government's payroll, because then how will they criticize the government when the government does something wrong? Isn't that the problem in many Muslim countries today? Many scholars, they cannot open their mouth, because if they open their mouth, they know they're going to lose their job. They know they're going to be, out on the streets. They might be thrown in the prison. So Imam Abu Hanifa was even beaten up. How dare you refuse? We wanted you to be a qadi, a judge, and refuse to us. So he's beaten up for that, and yet he did not budge. By the way, Imam Malik was the opposite opinion. Imam Malik said not only the scholars should, be on the payroll of the government, they should be the leading figures in the government. Because his understanding was, if the government has no scholars in it, how will this government have any wisdom in it? You need the best minds to be working with the government. So you see, both of them have their own understanding and difference of opinion on this. I mean, it depends on what you mean by criticize the government. You're not allowed to lead a civil war against the government. That's what you're not allowed in Islam, because that is going to cause chaos. That is going to cause bloodshed. It's not really going to achieve you much in terms of where you want to see things. Unless, of course, the government is doing haram openly, the government is going against Islam openly, then whoever from the society can do anything, even physically, to change things, should do it. But in regular circumstances, one is not allowed to revolt against the government, because that is going to upset the social setup, the economic setup. Poor people, innocent people are the ones usually who are the victims of these kinds of things. But scholars throughout Islamic history used to give very strong opinions to government. Like Imam al-Nawawi, he used to write annually letters to the government and the governor, telling him, this is where you're wrong, and this is what you shouldn't do, and your policy here should improve in this area. So you should be giving input and criticism, constructive criticism to the government. Of course, in our times also, if you do that, be ready to be in prison, right? In many of the cases where there's kingdoms and there's these dictators, of course, they're not going to take any criticism at all. So you do whatever you can without disrupting the setup. That's the key here. If you're going to cause huge upset to the system and the casualties will be the poor people, the innocent people, then you're doing more damage than the good that you're trying to achieve. But it is not true that you cannot criticize the government. I mean, in the time of Umar ibn Khattab, people used to stand up. The one time, Umar ibn Khattab came and he said, you should listen and you should obey me. So one young man, he stood up and he said, we're not going to obey you. Openly in his house. We're not going to listen to you and we're not going to obey you. Because he had a grievance with Omar, and Omar resolved that. In another case, Omar goes to the people and says, I want you all to straighten me when I go wrong. So this is the mindset of the leaders of that time. If I do something wrong, I want you to straighten me. Right? So another young man stood up and he took out his sword. And he said, don't worry, Amirul Mu'mineen, I'll straighten you up with my sword if you went wrong. I mean, imagine if somebody stood up in the parliament and said something like that to the president or the prime minister. I'm going to straighten you up real good. Right? He's going to be a danger to the state and the government, and he will be called a terrorist and thrown bars right away. So it's a different time, different setup, different kinds of people. Yeah, you wanted to say something? Yeah. What do you mean? I mean that. Yeah. How? And that's what I'm talking about. See, you have to weigh the good that you're trying to do and weigh it up against the harm that will come through that. You have to be realistic in your chances. If I'm just going to stand up and start, getting the crowd all rallied against the government or whatever, nobody's going to listen to me. Unless I am a powerful person, I have some influence, I'm a scholar with hundreds of thousands of people behind me, then, I can say, okay, the government better stop or else I am doing such and such an action. So you have to be realistic as to what your chances are of, toppling such government. If all you're going to do is just, get some people killed and yourself killed and the system will continue the way it is, then you're not really doing any service. What you should rather do then is prepare the groundwork for a later time where that might be possible, right? Then you start doing grassroots work, connections with people, informing people, letting them know what the wrong the governments are doing, so there are other ways also of making effort when governments go wrong. But the intention should not be to overthrow governments, in the first instance. Or it has to be, something very major that they have done which goes against or Islamic principles. That would be the scholars of the time have to look into it, right? What it is. I mean, if the government, for example, introduces a bill and passes a bill saying that, we're going to have an interest-based economy. We're going to embrace interest as our economic system. That is pretty big, for the scholars then to raise voices and give khutbahs or tell people that the government is going wrong. So it has to be something major, something that is going to shake something in Islam which is very, very established, well known. People, are going to support you in that. It's not a matter of opinion. That's what I mean. Like, it's not like, there are some scholars who say this and others say that, and then you're like, no, my opinion is right and the government must go because my opinion is right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just giving you an example because you said threshold. It has to be something major. And it has to be done by the right people and people of knowledge. Because sometimes you might think the government is doing wrong, but they might not be. Who knows? Because we get personal with the governments also, right? We have our personal grievances with governments which come into play. Allahu Alam. So that's a different discussion. But the point I'm trying to make is that Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik had different opinions regarding serving jobs or being employed by the government. Similarly, during the rule of the Abbasids, he also refused royal appointment and was consequently imprisoned in Baghdad by Caliph Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. So both the Umayyads and the Abbasids tried to employ him, but he refused both times. So he did not side with any of those empires that were wanted. And of course, they wanted him on their side because he was very influential. So they knew if he starts working for us, and we got all these people behind him who are with us now, and will become stronger politically. Yes, sir. Banu Umayyah and Banu Abbas. So these are both tribes from Quraysh. Banu Umayyah was one of the tribes of Quraysh. This is the tribe from which Uthman ibn Affan belonged. Okay. Banu Abbas are the children of Al-Abbas, who are the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His family and his tribe are known as Banu Abbas. So when you look at the caliphs, the four caliphs, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was not from these two tribes. Umar was not from these two tribes. But when Uthman became caliph, he is from Banu Umayyah. Okay? And that's what one of the accusations was against him, right? A false accusation that he was preferring his own family, Banu Umayyah, and he was giving them jobs and posting them. No, that is not true, but it was used against him. And then the next Khalifa is Ali, who is from Banu Abbas now. So these are two rival tribes. Even before Islam, there was rivalry between these families, right? Which then started playing out in later politics. So after Ali radiallahu anhu, then the issue came up with Muawiyah. Muawiyah is again from Banu Umayyah. So you see it's flipping and flopping between the two families. So when Muawiyah became Khalifa, from him until 100 years later, only the Banu Umayyah family ruled. That's why it was known as the Umayyad dynasty. But after that, it was toppled by Banu Abbas again, 100 years later, and then they took over. And they ruled for few hundred years after that. That is why they are known as the Abbasids. And Imam Abu Hanifa was there in both times. So he saw the end of the Banu Umayyah time and he saw the beginning of Banu Abbas time. Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Muslim. Muslim judges, Muslim courts, you know. Yeah, political parties, kind of, yeah. You can see them as like that. That's why we don't call that caliphate. The caliphate ended with Al-Hassan. You know, Ali radiallahu anhu and then Al-Hassan radiallahu anhu, he ruled for 6 months. And then he gave away Muawiyah. He didn't want fighting to continue, so he gave power to Muawiyah. So Muawiyah radiallahu anhu is the first king in Islam from the Muslim, you know, Ummah. He's the first king. And then his family and so on. So that happened, you know, this is part of Islamic history. It was there, it happened, and it's still happening. According to those people, they had wisdom. They thought it is in the best interest. Like, for example, when Muawiyah radiallahu anhu was passing away, many of his people came to him and said, don't appoint Yazid, son, as the next caliph, because he was not deserving. You know, he was just not deserving. And he was, till the very end, kind of double-minded. If you read the historical record, he's double-minded. Should I transfer it to him or somebody else? But, you know, he left it with it. And from there, it was just son, father to son, father to son, father to son, and so on. But remember, caliphate will be re-established. It will come back in the end of time. In fact, there are narrations which say that we will start as caliphate, then we'll become kingdom, then we'll become dictators, and then we'll return to caliphate. So we are, yeah, the kingdoms are kind of going away now. Very few kingdoms are left. There are some still, but we are mostly ruled by the dictators right now. And now the last phase will come back again, inshallah. It will be the Khilafah again, inshallah. Yeah, maybe you can think about it like that. Yeah, it will. Khilafah has to be in the Quraysh. Yeah, so he's from the descendant, and you know we have information about end of time. We did a long piece about that few years ago. So I don't want to get into that and sidetrack from the Madhab. Okay, let's continue. Sisters, are we good? Brothers always are asking all the questions. So sisters, are we doing okay? Alhamdulillah. All right. Sisters don't ask the questions, but you know sisters always win the prize. Because they are talking less and listening more. Brothers are doing what? Talking more and listening almost, you know, nothing at times. No, I'm sure you are listening, mashallah. All right. He imprisoned until his death in 767. So his final years, Imam Abu Hanifa was in prison because of Banu Abbas, you know, not liking that he is refusing to be part of the government, and that was his punishment. And that shows his dedication to what he principally believed, you know, that it should not happen. Even though he was tortured and imprisoned, he did not waver from his opinion. Imam Abu Hanifa was considered among the minor tabi'un, as I said, students of the Sahaba, because he had met a few of the Sahaba and had related some hadith from them. So that's an honor. Imagine you met a Sahabi. Isn't that an honor for you? Of course, being a Sahabi is the greatest honor. You met the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But what's the next best after that? You met somebody who met the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you're directly getting information from them. So Imam Abu Hanifa had that honor of meeting some of the Sahaba. Okay, now let's turn to the madhab. There's many stories of wisdom, by the way, of Imam Abu Hanifa, which we can get into later sometime. But since we are focused on the fiqh, that's what the topic of this series is, evolution of fiqh. So let's focus on that. Imam Abu Hanifa based his teaching method on the principle of shura, group discussion. Everyone has a different teaching methodology. Imam Malik his teaching was lecture based. He's the only one who speaks. Imam Malik, when he's giving his teaching, students, you're not allowed to, kind of give your own opinions. You're not allowed to kind of, say maybe this way or that way. You receive knowledge from him and you take it home, memorize it, and you go from there. That's Imam Malik's way of teaching, right? Imam Abu Hanifa is different. He is like a group of scholars. His students are like scholars themselves, right? So they sit together and he has a discussion with them. Some issue is raised, say, is this halal or is this haram? Some issue is brought up, and then they go around the circle, and each of his students who are ulama themselves, they give their evidences, they give their opinion, and at the end it comes to Imam Abu Hanifa, and he says, this is what my opinion is, and then his students, they go with that opinion. So it's a discussion-based kind of system, shura system, that Imam Abu Hanifa had. He would present a legal problem to his students for a debate and discussion and tell them to record its solution whenever they arrived at a unified position. So they all have to go through this process themselves first. You all study this issue and then you come up with an answer. And then Imam Abu Hanifa is going to look at the answer and give comments. Because of this interactive approach to making legal rulings, we could say that the Hanafi madhab was as much a product of Imam Abu Hanifa's students' efforts as it was a product of his own, right? So his students are doing a great contribution, making great contribution to his school of thought, because they are the ones who are having the discussion. They are the ones who are thinking of evidences, and then at the end they bring their findings, their research to the teacher. They would also debate on hypothetical problems and work out solutions based on the principle of preparing the problem before its occurrence. So when I say that, I need to qualify this by saying that these were not outrageous hypothetical scenarios. There's a difference between making a hypothetical scenario based on reality. This can happen tomorrow. Okay? Like for example, one hypothetical thing that we can think of, which has not happened yet with us here in the masjid, but it's possible that it might happen. Imagine somebody walks into the masjid and he says, I am a homosexual Muslim. I am a Muslim. I believe in Allah and I believe in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this person walks into the masjid and says, you have to accommodate me. Okay? We're not discussing this, by the way. So don't get started. Don't get started here. No. We're not discussing this right now. I am just giving you a hypothetical scenario, which is a real it's not happened yet, right? Alhamdulillah, it has not happened. But is there a possibility of that happening in the environment we're living in? Yes, there is so this is kind of a hypothetical scenario which is rooted in reality. So that's what Imam Abu Hanifa and his students used to do. I am not talking about a hypothetical scenario which is so outrageous that there is no possibility of that ever happening, and you're having a discussion and trying to get, its solution and so on. Right? No. Alhamdulillah. Yes. No, it didn't happen. But it can happen in our time. Yeah. We're not discussing the answer to that question. I'm just saying this is a question that we might have to face in the future. Right? It can happen. Gender identity issues, right? Yeah, we have to face, that's what we're talking about. That we have to prepare for this scenario, right? We have to prepare. Brother, it's everywhere now. Everywhere now. It's not Arab or non-Arab or whatever. It's everywhere now. You want to say something, brother? It happens. Yeah. No, here in the US. Yeah. This happens, it is happening. All I'm trying to tell you is what's the difference between the hypothetical scenarios that Imam Abu Hanifa and his students would discuss versus the hypothetical scenario. I told you about the story of that brother, right, who wanted to know Qibla direction in the halaqah. Gave you that example before. I was in Morgantown, West Virginia, and I was attending the halaqah. Okay, Sheikh was there, big Sheikh was giving presentation, and like whole crowd is there, and this brother raised his hand. Q&A was going on, and he said, Sheikh, what if I am lost in the forest? Which way should I pray? Right? So the Sheikh said possible, because in those times, by the way, cell phones were not that great. I'm talking about late 90s, early 2000. That's the kind of time. So the Sheikh said, well, you look at the sun. He gave an answer. He told him something. And then the brother sat down. After a few minutes, again, hand is up. Sheikh, what if I am in the middle of the sea? Which side should I look at, if I am? So the Sheikh, he says, brother, are you a sailor? Do you go to sea? Is that part of your life, He said, no, but what if? What if I ever end up in the sea, I get lost in the sea, and I have to make my salah? Which way, what do I do? So once again, the Sheikh, he gave him some answer. And he sat down. After a few minutes, again, the hand is up. Sheikh, what if I'm in space? Sheikh, what if I am in space? Where should I face the Qibla? So the Sheikh, by this time, he had just, had enough of this guy. And he's like, brother, are you an astronaut? What are your chances of ever going to space and this happening? This question coming up. So you see, you can become ridiculous in your hypothetical scenarios. You can become as ridiculous as you want. And that's what was happening in the later centuries. So we're talking about early centuries right now, but later centuries, that's what happened in the court debate, where the ruler, the king, the khalifa, the governor, he would bring a Hanafi scholar, he'll bring a Shafi'i scholar. And they would make up a hypothetical scenario and say, both of you have to debate. So the Hanafi would present their opinion, Shafi'i would give their opinion, and then one of them would win and the other would lose. It was like for entertainment. When you make up scenarios just to have fun, what could be the answer of this and what could be the answer of that. One time a man came to Umar ibn al-Khattab and he said, what should I do if this or that happens? So Umar said, has this happened? He said, no, I'm just making a hypothetical scenario. Umar says, go back. When it happens, then come to me. I'll call the people of Badr and we'll decide that. Meaning, don't make up hypothetical fiqh and scenarios which are, way out there, which have no possibility of happening, because you're wasting your time. Instead, focus on things which are happening with your life and how to solve problems. So Islam is a very, how should I say, practical religion, pragmatic religion. You don't go into, this idealistic thing and just theories and coming up with scenarios and coming up with hypothetical situations and so on. So Imam Abu Hanifa and his students did that, but that was rooted in reality. That was my point. MashaAllah, I have to be careful with you guys. Because of their leaning towards hypothetical fiqh, which often introduced an issue with the question, what if so and so happened, they became known as the what-ifers. Imam Abu Hanifa's students became known, the school became known as the what-ifers, because they would do this kind of hypothetical thing. Not outrageous hypothetical scenarios, but still, the people of opinion or Ahlul Ra'i or the what-ifers. Okay, now we turn to the sources of the Hanafis. What are the sources that the Hanafi school of thought use in order to get to answers? Of course, the first one, which everyone uses, is the Quran, right? All schools agree with this. They consider the Quran to be the primary, unquestionable source of Islamic law. In fact, it's to determine the accuracy of other sources. Accordingly, any other source that contradicted the Quran was considered inaccurate. So that is agreed upon. If there's anything which contradicts the Quran, agreed upon, that go with the Quran as the definite source, the authoritative source. Number two, once again agreed upon, Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Sunnah was touted as the second most important source of Islamic law, but with some qualifications as to its use. They stipulated that it was not sufficient that a hadith be accurate or sahih, but it had to also be widely known or mashhur if it was to be used as legal proof. Why did they stipulate this? So Imam Abu Hanifa in his school, they are saying that the hadith has to be sahih, authentic, but also has to be mashhur, well known to people. It cannot be a sahih hadith which very few people know about. He won't take that. Yes. Lot of inaccurate hadith circulating in the area, and so this was a second layer of protection that he is adding on to it. He is trying to protect his school from any information entering it. So he's saying it has to be authentic, meaning its chain has to go all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ, but also it should be well-known hadith. It shouldn't be a hadith that very few people know or nobody knows, and we're saying it is authentic, which is protecting his madhab from inaccurate hadith, but also what is it doing? The problem with this methodology. What's the problem with this methodology? Where you say, I'm going to add this second layer. If it doesn't go through these two layers, I'm not going to accept the hadith. What's the problem with this approach? What will end up also happening? Okay, how? Okay. Okay. Yes. No, I'm talking about something which is there in hadith. Imam Abu Hanifa is saying, oh, I'm going to only accept this hadith if it is authentic and it is well known. So what is the problem with this approach? You might end up losing a lot of authentic hadith just because they are not mashhur. They are not famous, but they are still authentic, right? So because you're trying to be extra careful, you're going to lose out on some information which is good. See, so there is some benefit to this approach, and then there is a problem also to this approach. So that's why Imam Abu Hanifa's school, they missed out on many hadiths which other schools used. They would take those hadith which Imam Abu Hanifa's school did not take, even though they were authentic, but because they were not well known in their area, they were not well known to their scholars, so they ended up losing out on that. So it has its benefit and it has its downside as well. This condition was laid down as a safeguard against false hadiths which were cropping up frequently in that region, where only a few notable Sahaba had settled. Ali and Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhuma are the two Sahaba who settled in the area. So that's why he needs to be careful. The third source the Hanafis used was ijma. Third in importance as a source of Islamic law was the unanimous opinion of the Sahaba on any point of law not specified in the Quran or the Sunnah. So when we say ijma, what do they mean by ijma? So ijma of the not the scholars, of the Sahaba. Because it was not possible to have ijma of the scholars. I told you the empire had become so big that one scholar is sitting in Western Africa, the other scholar is sitting in Afghanistan. They have no contact with each other. So how are you going to develop consensus of scholars worldwide? You're not going to be able to do that. So what they did was they said, we're going to go with the consensus ijma of the Sahaba, which has reached us. If the Sahaba agreed on something, all of them said this is halal, then we're going to take it. If all of them said this is haram, we're going to go in that direction. Okay? So that's the Hanafi approach. The third thing is ijma of the Sahaba. No, but we have their opinions. The Sahaba's opinions we still have on many issues, and we can still use them. Their ijma is still recorded with us, right? You're talking about new issues. These are not new issues. These are already discussed by Sahaba. So you don't need to rediscuss them here. Imam Abu Hanifa would not open it up for discussion again. He said all the Sahaba agreed on this. That's it. We're not going to discuss this issue as a new issue, right? Yes. No, this is in the earlier times when they were living in Medina in the Khulafa Rashidun time. They were established and they were together. So it was many of their consensus was recorded and passed on to the generations coming. So we're talking about that consensus from history which they reached upon, right? Not in Imam Abu Hanifa's time. There are hardly any Sahaba anyway. They've died. Most of them have passed away. We're talking about earlier times when the Sahaba were together in Medina, and in the time of Umar an issue came up So they discussed it, they agreed a consensus. In the time of Uthman, an issue came up, they discussed and reached an ijma for that. So that's what we're talking about. Yes, they already had a system in place where it was recorded and passed down to the generations to come. Yes. Sallallahu. Yes. It is highly improbable because the first stage of the hadith authentication was gathering of the hadith. First stage, the scholars didn't care if the hadith is right or wrong. They said collect every hadith out there first, get everything in first, and then we're going to sort it later. That's why it took so long, because their first job was collect all the hadiths that are out there. So they went in different areas, in different geographical locations, wherever the Sahaba had settled. Okay, those locations were well known. Where did Abdullah ibn Masud go and settle? Where did for example, Abu Dhar al-Ghifari go? Where did Muawiyah go? All the Sahaba, their locations were known. So wherever they went, these scholars of the area, they collected those narrations first. That is why the earliest hadith books, you will find in them all kinds of hadith, authentic hadith, wrong hadith, lies, weak hadith, all kinds of hadith are in those books, the earliest hadith books that we have. Like Imam Ahmad's Musnad Imam Ahmad, it's like a collection of 40,000 plus hadith. 40,000. It's just one scholar collected 40,000. But it has in it all kinds of hadith. And that the second stage then was people like Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim coming in and sorting through it and then dividing it up in different branches. Got it? Yes. Many criteria were developed. I mean, the chain has to be connected all the way to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. The people in that chain have to be well known. Their lives have to be well known and documented. If there is somebody who was not known in history, then that weakens the chain right away. So these people have to be well known individuals in their societies. They have to be respecting them. They have to have good memories. They have to have in display that their memories were good throughout their life. And that's why sometimes the scholars would say when this person was in his 30s and 40s and 50s, we take his hadith. But if he narrated a hadith when he's in 70s and 80s and 90s, say we're not going to take his hadith. Why? Because his memory had weakened by that time. So they had detailed information, biographies of these people, which were written throughout the ages by the people. The historians of their time had written these biographies. He was one of the most strict criteria. That is correct. Yeah. So they had criteria. It was a science developed, jarh wa ta'dil, it's called in Arabic, which is criticism of hadith. How they would pick, say. Sometimes they would even reject a hadith even though the chain is good. But the content of the hadith, they would say it contradicts another hadith or the Quran. They would say, so even the chain is good, we cannot take this hadith. They would label those hadith as ghuraba, strange. It's very strange that the hadith is authentic, but what it's saying makes no sense if we look at other hadith. So they have all kinds of criteria. And there are books written about this science that you can study. Okay, let's continue. We don't want to spend all night here. The Hanafi madhab also recognized the ijma of the Muslim scholars in any age as valid and binding on Muslims. So that's now the second level. Ijma of the scholars comes after the ijma of the Sahaba. First the Sahaba, their ijma. And then whatever ijma can be reached in your geographical area. In Iraq, scholars of Iraq, at least do your ijma here. Scholars of Hijaz, do your ijma there. So then the second was ijma of the local area. Then the fourth one that the Hanafis used was the individual opinion of a Sahabi. If there were different opinions among the Sahaba on a particular point of law and no ijma was subsequently formed, Imam Abu Hanifa would choose the opinion which appeared most appropriate to the case in question. So now this is where he starts using his own intellect. So let's say Abu Bakr anhu had one opinion, Omar had another opinion, and Aisha had a third opinion on that. And all three have different opinions on that issue. Now Imam Abu Hanifa is going to see which opinion is most appropriate for our question here that we are trying to answer. So that's where now ijtihad comes in. In establishing this as a vital principle of his madhab, Imam Abu Hanifa again gave more weight to the opinions of the Sahaba than to his own. Once again, he could have jumped to his own opinion. He said, because the Sahaba don't agree on this issue, right? So I should be open then to give my opinion, because they also gave their opinion, they never agreed on it. But he didn't do that. He said, even though they didn't agree, I am going to still pick one of the opinions from them, rather than giving my own opinion. So he is avoiding getting into it himself and keeping his opinion as one of the last things. By the way, this is the opposite of our situation today. We put our opinion number one. I think this is how it should be, right? No, we are very eager that our opinion be heard and our voice is the last voice. However, he did apply his own reasoning in a limited sense by choosing one of the various opinions. Do we understand this? Individual opinions of Sahaba where they're differing, then he is going to pick one of them for his madhab or his rule. The one which makes the most sense to him based on the situation he has. So yes, so logical, intellectually viable, whatever you want to call it. Then number 5 for him was qiyas. Okay? Imam Abu Hanifa felt no obligation to accept the deductions of the students of the Sahaba, the Tabi'een, in areas where no clear proof was available from any of the above mentioned sources. Why doesn't he think the Tabi'een's opinion should be an important part of his madhab? Because now he has reached their level, right? He himself is from the Tabi'een, so they are like him in their knowledge. Just like the Tabi'een got their knowledge from the Sahaba, he also got his knowledge from the Sahaba, even though he is from the minor Tabi'een. So that's where he now feels comfortable giving his own opinion. He considered himself the equal of the Tabi'un and would make his own ijtihad based on the principles of qiyas, which he and his students established. Do we understand what qiyas means? Who can explain here what qiyas? You want to say? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but what's the criteria here? What are you going to base your discussion on? Just personal opinion, or is there a criteria? Qiyas has a specific criteria. But then you don't need qiyas if there is clear proof, right? Then you already settled the issue. Okay, how? Yeah, that's my question. What's the criteria for qiyas? Anyone here has studied this? Knows it? No, it's not democracy, brother. Not everything is solved by democracies. This is what they call analogy. Qiyas means analogy. So there was an issue similar to my new issue. It's not exactly the same, but a similar issue came up in the Prophet's time or in the Quran or the Sunnah, and whatever the ruling of that issue is, should be the same ruling of this issue. An example of that is drugs. Drugs, they are not mentioned in the Quran. The Sunnah doesn't mention anything about drugs. But the scholars say drugs are haram. We're talking about drug abuse here, not the medicines, right? We're talking about drugs, cocaine and all this stuff, which we use. The scholars say, Islamic scholars say it's haram. Why is it haram? Because they say Allah has forbidden alcohol in Quran. Why did Allah forbid alcohol? One of the reasons is health, mind, okay, senses. So what does cocaine do also? To your health, to your mind, to your senses, these drugs, they have the same effect as alcohol. So if alcohol is haram, then they would say drugs also should be haram. So you see, this is how they did analogy. But analogy is a tricky business. Not easy. Maybe you are comparing apple to oranges, right? Because you're basically comparing two situations, saying this is the old situation, this is the new situation, and they are exactly the same. So that's why their ruling has to be the same. You could be wrong. They might not be the same. There might be aspects which are different. And that's why this is not an early source. It's a later source. Fifth on his list is number 5. It comes number 5, not number 4 or 3. Do we understand that? Okay, number 6 for Imam Abu Hanifa was a concept known as istihsan. Istihsan, in short, is the preference of one proof over another proof because it appears more suitable, even though the preferred proof may be technically weaker than the one it is preferred. So you have two opinions. One opinion says halal, the other opinion says haram. Let's say the one which says halal is technically strong. It has more proof to it. Okay? The one which says haram is weaker in its technical proof. But the one which says haram is more suitable. It's going to solve your problem. Whereas if you went with the one which says halal, it's going to make complications for people. It's going to make very difficult. Life will be very difficult for people. So Imam Abu Hanifa would go with the weaker one because it solves problem. And he called this concept istihsan. And this is in every madhab. All 4 madhabs have this. It's just the name they gave it is different. Some called it this, some called it something else. But this is number 6, by the way. We're not talking about the first 5. Talking about number 6. You don't have anything in the Quran. You don't have anything in the Sunnah. The Sahaba did not say anything about it. Ijma, there's no ijma of the Sahaba. There's no individual opinions of any Sahabi on that issue. Okay? None of those are there. You cannot even compare it. Qiyas is also very difficult. Now you are left with this and you're wrestling your mind. Should I say halal? Should I say haram? Yes. Yeah, of course, based on whatever knowledge they have in their. We're not saying that perfect. That's why this is fiqh. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. That's why, fiqh, that's what one of the things I think of this series long time ago when we started is fiqh is evolving. Fiqh will change with time. When new information comes, you can change your ruling. We're talking about at that current time, whatever resources they have, whatever research is available to them, based on that, they have to give an opinion. Oh, yes. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, for example, if it's a medical issue, like you brought up medical, then they would consult, Muslim physicians and doctors who were serving in the hospitals at the time with their knowledge of the time, whatever. Of course, it cannot be compared to our knowledge of things today. Okay, but there was a process. The same thing has happened. A good example of this is smoking. I always give the example of smoking. If you ask the majority of the Muslim world, is smoking haram or is smoking makruh? Makruh means dislike but not haram. Okay, the majority of the people will say what? Makruh. Why? Why do they say makruh? Huh? Because so if it's not mentioned in the Quran, you just call it makruh. What's the reason for makruh and not haram? Yes, brother Tariq? Huh? Because they prefer this. No, it's based cultural, yeah, but it's based on a fiqh ruling. Islamic 100 years ago gave this, which became popular in the Muslim world. Because in their time, they were basing it on the opinion it is not haram because they didn't have the understanding of the medical science that we have today. In their time, 100 years ago, they said it is makruh because when you smoke, bad smell. They're basing their ruling on smell. It's disturbing. You smoke and come next to me, I'm going to be like, away from me, brother. Right? It gives a bad smell of your mouth. So they said that's why it's disliked. Imagine you smoke and you have all this bad smell and you come for prayer. Imagine that, bad smell. So But many of the same scholars who 100 years ago, or few decades ago were saying it is makruh, once the new information came, it is causing lung cancer, it is causing throat cancer, all kinds of health issues. They changed the ruling. Say, no, not makruh, haram. Smoking is haram in Islam. But what many of the brothers are still using is what? The old, because they want to somehow justify, it's okay, let me be a smoker somehow. It's not allowed in Islam for you to smoke because you are killing your own self. And you have no right to kill yourself. You have no right to harm your health. This is a well-known principle. So you see the example, brother, I'm trying to explain to you how fiqh develops. In our time, there might be some rulings that we are giving today because we don't have information today. Maybe they will be changed 100. This is the flexible part of Islam. The Sharia is not flexible. Sharia is fixed. Whatever Quran said, whatever Sunnah said, there is no flexibility there. But it's the fiqh part where there is flexibility. Fatalism, huh? Yeah. Brother, just go and put a dagger in your heart, and Allah knows best. If I were to die, it will happen. This isn't suicide. It is slow suicide. Huh? Not going to happen right away. It's going to happen over the years. I mean, this is ridiculous reasoning if somebody is giving that. Is because your health, as we know, deteriorates over time. It's not something that you're going to do one time and kill yourself, right? Those are obviously very extreme cases. But this is a form of suicide if you're knowingly harming your health. And forget about suicide. Even if you never die because of that, but your health deteriorates and you're still living, your body is still going to put you before Allah on the day of judgment. Ya Allah, this guy abused me. Because remember, our bodies are trust from Allah. We have to take care of our bodies. It's not us. We are the soul. The reality of our existence is not this body. This is an amana, a trust from Allah. We need to take care of. Why do we have to brush our teeth? Why do we have to, take showers? Why should we dress properly? We are taking care of this amana from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our health and our body. So, if somebody is giving that reasoning, they don't even understand what the body is. From the very beginning, they have no understanding of how the importance of health and body is in Islam. Okay, did we get that? Do we understand istihsan? Istihsan is where technically sounds more reasonable to do, but the benefit harm to society is going to make you go in the other direction. So that's what we're talking about here. This may involve the preference of a hadith which is specific over a general one, or it may even involve the preference of a more suitable law over the one deduced by qiyas. Because qiyas, remember, is an opinion where you compare two things, right? And said the first one had this ruling, so the second one also has to have the same ruling. But if you went in that direction, that's going to cause harm to the society. Okay? Then you choose the other ruling. The seventh, how many have we done? 6. Do you still remember the 6? Let's see how many of you were up. Quran, Sunnah, Ijma of the Sahaba, individual opinion of a Sahabi. Okay, third one was Ijma of the Sahaba. All of them agree. And fourth one is picking from one of the opinions of the Sahaba. And then number 5, Qiyas. And number 6, Istihsan. And now number 7, Urf. Local customs were given legal weight in areas where there was no binding Islamic customs available. It was through the application of this principle that various customs, the multiplicity of cultures within the Islamic world, entered the legal system and became mistakenly classified as Islam. See, today we have one of the problems in the Muslim world. What? Culture is understood as religion. We think this is Islam when it is not Islam. But where did this concept come from? This came from the scholars who considered urf as one of the last sources. If you have no other way of finding what should we do, then leave it to local custom. It's okay. Let them do it the way they're doing. Okay? As long as it's not contradicting the first 6. Okay? It is just something they do it this way. It's okay for them to do it this way. Okay? the example, one of the examples of that is when you get married in many Muslim countries, we have the meher, which is the dowry which the man has to give the wife, and you will find muakhar and muajjal, or muqaddam and muakhar, which is part of it I'm going to give right now to my wife, and the other part in case I divorce her, right? This is not from the Quran and the Sunnah. In the Prophet's time, there was no muakhar and muqaddam, and there was nothing like that. This was based on cultural practices. And because many of the scholars said it does not contradict any of the six, okay, if in your culture you want to arrange the meher in that way, part of it right now, part of it I'm going to give you later, and the woman agrees, her wali agrees, it's okay, no problem, you can do it that way. So that's an example of urf. Another example that I give is the dressing. In some cultures, like frocks. Okay, if I wear a here in the United States as a man, Islam, is it halal or haram? A big frock, ladies dress. I dress like lady, you know, with a long frock. It's going to be a problem in Islam. It's not going to be allowed because men should not dress like women and women should not dress like men. But in Yemen and in Scotland, it is their tradition for men to wear those skirts. Okay? Have you seen the Pied Piper? Right? Also in Yemen, there are these long skirts that men wear. In Bangladesh, dhoti, we have the dhoti. In Pakistan also we have that. So what I'm saying is in those cultures, the scholars say it's okay. Because it's custom over there and this is a man's dress over there. This is part of how the men dress in those cultures. It's not a woman's dress particularly. So you see, culture can have a role. Islam is flexible. As long as it's not directly contradicting with the Quran and the Sunnah and the more important sources, then it will be. Okay, questions here? So the 7 sources, this is the takeaway. This was the most important part of today's session. The 7 sources of the Hanafi madhab. Once again, last time, Quran, Sunnah, Sahaba's ijma together, individual Sahabi picking from one of those opinions, qiyas, istihsan, urf, custom. Okay, this is the main. And then quickly, I'm just going to end with some of the students, the main students of Imam Abu Hanifa. Zufar ibn al-Huzayl, he was one of the main students. Zufar was one of those who followed Abu Hanifa's example and refused to accept appointment as a judge, even though many attractive offers were made to him. He preferred to teach, which he did until he died at the early age of 42. He was a young scholar, one of the students of Imam Abu Hanifa. Perhaps the most well-known student of the Hanafi madhab was Abu Yusuf, 735 to 795. Abu Yusuf was born in a poor family in Kufa. He studied hadith extensively until he became a noteworthy hadith scholar, then studied fiqh in Kufa for 9 years under Imam Ibn Abi Layla, whose father was a famous Sahabi from Medina. Abu Yusuf later studied under Abu Hanifa for 9 years, and when Abu Hanifa died, he went to Medina and studied for a short period under Imam Malik. This shows the flexibility of the early schools of thought. The students are going from one school to another. He's spending 9 years with Imam Abu Hanifa, then he goes to Medina, he learns from Imam Malik also, which is a completely different school of thought, and they have differences between them. But there is flexibility and there is travel between the scholars. Later centuries, what happened? It became crystallized, and if I am a Hanafi, I cannot go to a Shafi. If you're a Shafi, you cannot go to a Hanbali. You know, that flexibility was lost, and that's where factions and all these political visions came into the picture. Abu Yusuf was appointed chief judge of the state by the Abbasid Caliph Al-Mahdi, Al-Hadi, and Harun al-Rashid. In his capacity as chief judge, he used to appoint judges for the various cities, and all his appointees were followers of the Hanafi madhab. See, this is what I was telling you, why some madhabs became popular. Because, you know, he becomes a judge, and now all the judges he's appointing in the empire are who? Hanafis. So, Shafi'is are not getting a chance, Malikis are not getting a chance, Hanbalis are not getting a chance. So, this is what influenced many to gravitate towards one madhab and leave the other. He did not. Yeah, and that was the flexibility. As I said, you don't have to agree with everything your teacher says, right? You respect him, you love him, you make dua for him, everything. But you might have your differences with your teacher on fiqh points of view. Thus, he was instrumental in the spread of this school of thought throughout the Muslim empire. Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, another great student. Like Abu Yusuf, his early studies were in Hadith. He studied briefly under Abu Yusuf and later traveled to Al-Madinah, where he studied under Imam Malik for 3 years. During this period, he became one of the main narrators of Malik's Hadith book, Al-Muwatta. Imam al-Shafi'i was among the many scholars who later studied under Muhammad ibn al-Hasan in Baghdad. So you see, there's so much crossing over going on here. Muhammad ibn al-Hasan is a student of Imam Abu Hanifa. He studies under him. Then he studies under another student of Imam Abu Hanifa, Abu Yusuf. Then he goes, studies under Imam Malik. Okay. Then he transfers and he studies, under Imam al-Shafi'i's student and so on. So there is all this crossover going on. And then Imam, who was that? Imam al-Shafi'i, studied under him then. So became student. So the teachers, students, they are learning from each other. There is no visible, borders here. There's nothing which divides the ummah in scholarship, as happened in later years. And this is the spirit we need again, the spirit of learning again. Muhammad ibn al-Hasan also accepted appointment as Qadi, the reign of Caliph Harun al-Rashid. Soon gave it up because of the many compromises which it demanded, returned to his teaching post in Baghdad. The Hanafi followers, those who now follow the Hanafi madhab, are found mostly in India, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Guyana, Trinidad, and to some extent in Egypt. When the Ottoman rulers codified Islamic law according to the Hanafi madhab in the 19th century and made it state law, any scholar who aspired to be a judge was obliged to learn it. As a result, the madhab spread throughout the Ottoman Islamic state during the last part of the 19th century. So you see, politics has a lot to do with the spread of these madhabs. The Ottoman Empire adopted its official madhab as the Hanafi madhab, and then they spread it throughout the empire, which made it really famous. Anyone has any final questions? Today we went over the Hanafi madhab, Imam Abu Hanifa's own life, and then his methodology in fiqh, and then his students, and where the madhab stands right now. Any comments or questions before we end? Oh yes, each madhab has their own book. Okay? In a lot of Islamic universities, when you go and you want to study fiqh, you want to become a faqih, a scholar of fiqh, the first thing that you have to write on the form is there are 4 or 5 boxes and you have to pick one. Do I want to become a Hanafi faqih, a Shafi'i faqih, and based on whichever school you choose, you will be sent to that department and they will have their own curriculum, they'll have their own books written by the scholar that department, and so on. That is fine. That is fine as long as it is within those. You are pretty much covered. If it is within those 4 schools, you're pretty much covered. Okay, and then there are things about trust, because the common person cannot do all this research and find out who's right and wrong in each and every issue, right? So you have to stick to the scholars you have, your teacher. Basically, that's where it's down to. Who is your teacher? Just go with your teacher. As long as you trust your teacher, whatever his madhab is, whatever his school of thought is, you go with it. Until you reach a point where you can start, arguing with your teacher on technical basis, and then you can, start forming opinions and so on. Yeah. I mean, it continued for a few hundred years after Imams. I wouldn't say it stopped right after them. Their students and some of their students continued for a few hundred years. But then by the time the 11th, 12th century came, almost the door of ijtihad and research was, and you just had to follow. If I'm a Hanafi, just follow the Hanafi madhab. If you're a Shafi, just follow that. And that even happened with students. Students were not encouraged. Like I said, even today you go to universities, students are not encouraged to go to Quran and Sunnah sources and extract new rulings based on the times we are living. Most of them, they're just memorizing 600-year-old books and rulings that were there from the madhab of that time, which is the problem because you cannot make progress then. The early scholars were making progress because they were in line, in sync with their culture, their time, their needs, right? But today, if you're going to be following a fatwa which was given 800 years ago in a different country, and you're trying to apply it here in your life, it's not going to work. It's not going to work because your circumstances have changed. Your demands have changed. You know, the people have changed. Societies have changed. Culture has changed. So it won't work in every, and this is the problem we're facing. But slowly we are getting out of this. Now we see some hope in some universities around the world and some scholars who are beginning again this light of research and ijtihad is coming back slowly. But it will take time, definitely. Yes, yes. Mhm, mhm. Yes, absolutely. It's real. It happens. I mean, it's part of the world we live in. Those are part of the divisions we have. Um, as I said, it will change in the coming centuries or decades to come. Inshallah, hope it will change and we'll go back. As I said in one of the earlier talks, do you know that until 1925 in Mecca, in the Kaaba, when you would go for Hajj or Umrah, and it's time for Salah, there were four different Imams on four different corners of the Kaaba that they would lead Salah. One side is Hanafi. If you're a Hanafi, you go that side with that Imam. If you're a Shafi, you go on this side of the Kaaba with this Imam. If you go back and look at pictures from before 1925 of the Kaaba, the Haram area, you'll find these mimbars, four mimbars around the Kaaba because they're giving khutbahs. Also, the Imams on Friday, you know, at 1:30, the Hanafi Imam comes and gives khutbah. At 2 o'clock, the Shafi Imam gives. So this is how the Ummah was divided. It has been divided for hundreds of years now. Okay? And now we are slowly emerging out of it. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it was on one side. Yeah. Yes. 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 That is true. Yeah. Yeah. There are those differences are there. Those differences are there. Mhm. Mm. Well, as long as the animal has not died, before death you have to do the slaughter. If that gun is causing the animal to die and then you're doing slaughter afterwards, then it's definitely dead animal and it's not allowed. Yeah, yeah. How do they do it in Hajj time? Because again, millions of sacrifices are happening there. How do they do it in Makkah? No, don't assume. You might be surprised. You might be surprised. Yeah. So what I'm saying is that can go back to that principle that we read was istihsan principle. Is it going to, if you follow the right thing, you do it very properly, is it going to cause a mass hardship and will become impossible for people to do it? Then the scholars might show flexibility with other ways of doing it. But the basic principle is still that it's a slaughter while the animal is living and not after the death of the animal. If whatever you're doing is causing the animal to die first and then you're doing the slaughter, Allahu Akbar. Yes, sir. And that's the reason, right? Because once the animal dies, the blood flow is gone. See, the heart has to keep functioning. When the slaughter happens, the heart is pumping blood. That's how the blood will come out. If the heart has stopped, the blood is going to start freezing in the veins in the body, and then the animal will have a lot of blood left. So that's why the animal has to be alive when that slaughter happens. And that the way they do it in the Islamic way is that they don't cut the whole thing like this. Yeah, it's done in a way that the heart continues pumping for a while after the slaughter. Yeah, that I don't know. I have to look into that. How do they do it? I've never researched that as much. Yes, Fareed. I mean, whatever you want to call it, these madhabs also popped up, right? They were never intended. I mean, Imam Abu Hanifa, when he was doing his research, he was not intending to start a new madhab. He was just trying to find solution, answer to questions that were there in his time. It was just over time the madhab became. I mean, if you were to ask Imam Abu Hanifa, are you a Hanafi? He would say, what are you talking about? Because the Hanafi madhab wasn't even in existence when Imam Abu Hanifa was living. This is after the death of these ulama, then their students, gathered their work and made it into some kind of a madhab. So the job is today of the ulama to do what Imam Abu Hanifa was doing 1200 years ago, 1300 years ago, to find solution to our modern day problems from the Quran and the Sunnah. Okay? So if their theories or their solutions become popular, and one day a madhab comes out, Farid madhab, right? It can happen, right? Farid named after Imam Farid, if a madhab comes out later on. It's not like any different to what happened in the early century. So we shouldn't be afraid of that or think of it as a bid'ah or a, we're changing our religion or no, that's not what it is. Allahu Akbar. It's not requirement. Before the madhabs were there, Muslims were still Muslim, right? Right? Imam Abu Hanifa's madhab became a real madhab 150 years after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Before that, the Muslims were still following something, right? So what were they following? There were no Hanafis, there were no Shafis, there were no Malikis. I'm saying, the effort should be that we want to follow Allah and His Messenger. And whichever scholar and whichever madhab has the most proof for us to get to Allah and His Messenger, we should go with that. If we have the ability to look at proof. If you don't have the ability to look at proofs, you don't have that level of knowledge, then you trust some teacher and you follow that teacher, in your opinion. And Allahu Akbar. By the way, when it comes to community and masjid, you have to go with the imam. Sorry about that. That's how it works. So you could be from any madhab, from any school of thought. When you are part of a community, then the imam madhab is the madhab of the community. Because if we start allowing everyone to give their own opinion and own way of doing things, I am a Hanafi, I'm going to do it like this. I am a Shafi, I'm going to do it like this. Then there will be complete chaos in the masajid around the world, right? Any final things? Sisters, are we good? Okay, we'll stop here. Jazakumullah khair. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.